The world is a confusing place, filled with all manner of shimmering distractions that take our conscious mind and our immortal souls and subvert them into the most basal of human emotions. Can any one of us who considers ourselves a spiritual being truly look around the carnival at the barkers, performers, and the caged animals and believe, even momentarily, that any of this is as it should be? My name is Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana, distiller, historian, occasional tinker, reenactor, and your host of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Have you ever noticed the world isn't quite what it presents itself to be? That something is just a little off kilter, just a little out of focus. Perhaps that movement you caught out of the corner of your eye was more than a shadow, that weight on your shoulder more than fatigue. I have lived my whole life like this, aware, awake, and waiting for the next experience, positive or negative. Always apprehensive, always analyzing. I believe that spiritual warfare is real. I believe from societal observation that others are becoming acutely aware. I believe that many are being influenced by forces unknown in a negative and spiritually deprived way. I see soft disclosure in every corner of pop culture. Join us as we pull back the curtain, as the veil thins and reach with us into the ether to reclaim the truth on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Hey, I just wanted to take a minute to give a shout out to JJ Rose and some of her friends who have been coming to me to come onto this podcast. It's, as I've said in the past, been a little difficult from time to time to get guests on this podcast. It's a thing of passion for me, not something that I do for money, a thing that I do because I love doing it, and I'm a spiritual learner. I am growing in my spirituality, and I've gone through leaps and bounds in the past 2 months alone. A lot of interesting, strange things have happened on my end, and none of which are negative. They're all positive, even though growth always hurts a little bit. But I think you're going to enjoy tonight's guest, and I think you're going to enjoy some of the guests that we have coming up, because they are helping to take this show to entirely new levels. And that is highly, highly thanks to JJ Rose. That being said, some of you know that I used to be very agriculturally centered, and I still am agriculturally centered. In fact, I would say the vast majority of my spirituality grew out of my life on the farm and the experiences that we had on the farm as documented in The Trickster, but also various experiences that I had growing up in this strange little town of Pekin, Indiana. We've certainly done our fair share of stories about the high strangeness around this place. Well, during that time of agricultural endeavor, when my real emphasis and passion was on not only the agriculture itself, but the spiritual elements of agriculture and the philosophy of agriculture, and this idea of being a productive citizen, that the greatest thing that you could ever do was to introduce some new useful variety for agriculture, for food, for people, for things for people to grow. I really got into plant breeding, open pollinated land-raised plant breeding, and ran seed companies, ran various forums, and those sort of things. In that line of work, there were a number of guys who very much so had made a career out of this. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Alan Mushroom Capular. And Alan Capular was the founder of what you now know as Seeds of Change. Later on, he went on with Peace Seedlings and did a lot of public domain plant breeding. He was also an amazing painter, an old school hippie who lived in multiple communes, and a beautiful person to talk to. I wouldn't go as far as to say that we became close friends, but we certainly became somewhat associates, and we talked back and forth on the phone quite a bit, and Alan sent me a lot of seeds over the years, as well as some little pieces of his artwork that I really appreciated. He was someone that I really looked up to, not only because he was an absolute certifiable genius, and if you've never heard of him, look him up. He really was a genius, MacArthur Grant and all that fun stuff included. Also, though, Alan was quite the philosopher. His writings often tended, to bounce in between the scientific and the artistic. He was a huge admirer of early Bob Dylan, for example, and just wrote some really beautiful, profound things. I only recently found out that he passed away back in November, and I think the family kept it quiet, and I think they did for pretty good reason. He was a pretty big personality in those circles, and if you think that distillers or paranormal high strangeness folks are eclectic, well, wait until you meet some home plant breeders. It's a whole nother level of weirdness there. Alan had also had an interesting life in that there were multiple times when he had been diagnosed with cancer, and he sought alternative homeopathic treatments. He treated a lot of his illness himself, and then got into specialized treatments of his illness. At one point, they had literally given him a window, like they do many people, that you have X amount of time to live here on this earth, and he really hit the ground running and put the work in to save himself. Physician, heal thyself. That is a very hermetic thing, very tied to alchemy, and something that I always was just amazed by, right? That he wasn't going to let this thing get him down, but that he was going to face it head on. And thankfully, he did live to be 81 years old, which is pretty impressive considering the first time he was diagnosed with this terminal cancer, I believe, was in the early 1990s. Very few people get to that point where they can sort of overcome that demon. And I think that speaks as much to his spirit and his philosophy as it does his actual knowledge. Anyways, I went to peaceseedslive.com, and on the homepage there was a beautiful writing by Mushroom, and I thought I would share that here in honor of my friend before we get into tonight's episode. So it's called The End of Names by Mushroom. Sunlight in the morning bounces off of my brain. In a land where rain is becoming rare, and the melting of polar ice caps brings a feedback loop of awareness into the center of our minds. DNA sequences of nitrogen, heterocyclic bases make up chromosomes in patterns, unique for each of us, unique for our species, and for all species. One day soon, the sequence for one of us will be known exactly, just as the sequence of amino acids was worked out for proteins, insulin, ribonuclease, hemoglobin, so that now sequences fold in reaction space to give domains with molecular handles to the inside and outsides of our cells. The 20 amino acids specified by the genetic code and used to build proteins are unenhanced in the juices of common fruits and vegetables. We ignore origins and the core of sustainability. The large trees, one of our primary respirators, cycle oxygen, ventilating the interface of soil, water, air in which we live. Between air and earth, with water running in our veins, we have courted fire. Now the concentration of nuclear wastes, primarily for boiling water, contaminates parts of this country, world, and universe. The hoax of ownership continues to pervade our times, as the DNA barcode for each of us replaces our social security number. Where does our identity go when our salad is made up of leaves containing genes for 14 kinds of bacteria, representing 7 major biochemical adaptations, plus polysaccharide genes from algae, fermentation genes from yeasts, saprophytic adaptation genes from capped mushrooms, in addition to spore-making genes from ferns, vitamin E genes from cyanobacteria, floating genes from water hyacinths, salinity tolerance genes from glassworts, with more of the genetic sugars needed to repair and rejuvenate our chronically toxicated bodies. The combination of forms is the pathway of the opening of the treasure of the gene pool. With agreement from the courts, encouragement from the policymakers, strength of violent coercion from the military, Our leaders of government and industry have decided to continue slavery by owning and selling the parts of our bodies. This includes intellectual property from the domain in our minds. Inside all of this is undivided and indivisible unity. I'd rather be connected to the common divine core of everyone and everything than dividing up the holy realm of life itself for gain, profit, and control, for domination, egotism, and vanity. We continue to allow the ownership of living things. This is championed by the pharmaceutical houses, purveyors of immense amounts of synthetic drugs, and speculators in biotechnology, intent on the marketing of atomic real estate, arguing for patents on all kinds of molecules, based on the uniqueness of inventions, and the advocates and contributors participate in the ongoing destruction of biosphere habitats. By contracted view, practitioners, brings us to the end of names. Naming is becoming the sequence of genetic bases in our cells. When our bodies are mosaics of genes from all kinds of creatures, what will we call ourselves? Will we know ourselves, representative and part of all living creatures, each as common and precious, as extraordinary and average as we wish ourselves to be? Peace is growing in the garden of time. It continues to root, branch out, and leaf out. From the struggle to resist evil, to work for the common well-being, to serve a transcendent vision within, gardening is an essential part of world and personal transformation. Appreciation to Joyce Handler, who took the prose layout of the original and adapted it into this free rambling verse format. As you can see, Alan Mushroom Capular was quite the philosopher, and quite hermetic in his thoughts and his forms on these such things. And I have no doubt that he has ascended the 7 celestial spheres, climbed the 7-rung ladder, and is in deep conversation with the Pymander. Amen. Hey guys, welcome back to If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And in our attempt to expand the show beyond the distilled spirits realm and beyond me just rambling into a microphone all crazy like by myself in this tiny bedroom, I've been trying to work with some other people outside of my normal sphere of influence, including JJ Rose, who was kind enough to send a couple people my way that have very unique perspectives, very unique, I don't know if I would want to say belief or ideal systems, things that they're very passionate about and things that I think can expand your lexicon as you're getting into all of these subjects, whether they be the esoteric or even sometimes the more paranormal, high strangeness, Fortean sort of stuff, but they're all interrelated. And so tonight we have a very special guest, all the way from Ireland, as a matter of fact, which is super cool. So I am going to let her introduce herself and talk a little bit. And I know, not to bring up any bad blood or anything like that, but I know recently she was on another podcast that was not, I guess you'd say, very receiving of her message. And that's not what we're about here. This is literally about everybody getting their message out. There's an episode that'll either come out before this or after it. You know, my buddy Kevin Rose, who's an evangelical Christian, was on the show, and he sat right here in this room with me, and we had plenty to talk about, but we couldn't be more different in our spiritual beliefs. So that's what we're doing here. We're all trying to find out who we are and how we fit into the world, even amongst everyone else. So without further ado, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and we'll jump right into it.
Thank you. That was beautifully stated, by the way. So my name is Jace, and I am one of the hosts of a brand new podcast called Wabi Sabi. And I have been on a 35-year-long journey of figuring out how to be human, not really fitting into my own skin, figuring out how to navigate the hells of a human life and bad things happening and healing and going from victim to survivor to warrior to whatever it is that I am now. I'm a mom of 3 kids and I homeschool and I absolutely love it. And yeah, and today we're going to talk about Lilith.
Yeah, I can hear the collective groans from a few people. But listen, guys, just sit back and listen. You might learn something that you didn't know, or you might think about something in a way you didn't think about it before. So there's plenty of room for all of these things, and I'm hoping that we go deep into this. So you tell me all about Lilith, and I will ask questions as we go.
Okay, so for the most part, when you start looking into this character, we'll say, there's other stories that come up with her. There's the Mesopotamian goddess Lameshtu, which is the furthest back connection that we have to what we think she is. And when I read the story of Lameshtu, which she's depicted as this demon, she eats babies, she attacks pregnant women, she causes miscarriages. She is kind of a seducer in the dream realm. You know, there's a lot of sexual assault, there's a lot of things around sex and relationships and childbirth in particular. And when I read that, the only thing that really came to my mind was, what would women what would women be dealing with at that time? Mm-hmm. From a cultural perspective. If she could not get pregnant and bear a child for her husband, would she be lovingly embraced and have compassion, or would she be divorced and cast out, or in some cases killed?
Yeah, drives her perceived value for society down at that time, for sure.
Absolutely. And now we know that men's fertility plays a role in that whole thing as well. Mm-hmm. But maybe they didn't know that back then. Sure doesn't seem like they knew that back then. If a woman were to have a miscarriage, that would be a big, well, you did this. You killed that baby. You can't bring a baby to full term. That's your fault. So from my perspective, as a woman who's had a miscarriage and a woman who was raped at a very young age, I kind of look at that and go, why wouldn't you blame it on a demon? You're protecting yourself. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if this goddess was, or demon was, a true being in the spiritual realm, why don't we really see it now in today's culture?
Mm-hmm. Or
it's changed a lot.
Even you triggered something in my mind there too. Even the stigma of the miscarriage thing within certain societies. So, you know, that lowering her value and her worth within a society. Let's say she was someone who walked the planet in some human type form, as I believe that several of these myths and legends are. You know, so then what becomes her value? She becomes one of two things. If she can't be a wife and she can't be a mother, then the only things that they're going to perceive her as, you know, being worthy of, are going to be the various things, you know, like hedge witches, that sort of same sort of mentality, or, you know, being a potentially someone. Yeah, there's prostitute, and then there's also the potentiality as well of being a midwife, right? And then if someone else has a miscarriage, then it's very easy to pin that on her as well and say, well, that happened because you were there.
I never even thought about that. Yeah, absolutely. That could be, you know, you brought this curse on this household. How dare you?
The stigma that just keeps building over and over and over. So, yeah.
So that was my first, when I read, because obviously we don't know a whole lot about what the reputation of this entity was at the time. You know, we're going on stone, clay tablets and bowls and things that are being interpreted, but who's to say that they're not being misinterpreted in some way? Or that there's just a whole chunk that's missing because it was lost to time. So there's that. And then we go into Lilitu and Lilita. And these have over time morphed from a female and a male ghost. And every reference that I looked up was very specific. They are the ghosts of virgins who died before, quote, before they saw a city feast. So
yeah,
they never saw a city feast. That seems like an adolescent to me.
Yeah, and that's one I'd not ever heard before that I can think of or remember. So
yeah, and that phrase, they never saw a city feast, was repeated in everything that I looked at that came up. And that speaks to a death right before the coming of age.
Mm-hmm.
After perhaps an entire childhood of being groomed and prepared for this ritual to be introduced to society.
It immediately makes me think of things like, state-sponsored religion, like Saturnalia, right? Like that sort of thing. And that's what you're preparing, a child to grow into, to come into this and to experience it. It immediately makes me think of that, as though almost like with baptism, right? In certain faiths, if you're not baptized, no matter how young you are, it doesn't matter. You're not going to make it to heaven, or whatever the concept is. And it sounds very, very similar to that to me.
And that would be a massive, detriment to the psyche. So if something were to happen and these people were to be killed right before an event like that, and then now it's taken away from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's some serious unfinished business right there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And with that would come marriage and having children. And so the jump to succubus, succubi is not really that big of a leap, because they've missed out on this opportunity to have a life and be able to do the thing that they were trained to do or excited about or whatever, right? So
well, even within their perceived spiritualities, whatever their perceived spiritualities are, whether or not those were true or rightful paths, it's in their head that that's what's true and rightful. Mm-hmm. So regardless, there's that karmic loop of, nope, now we're staying here because things were not fulfilled, regardless of whatever higher truth there was in those thoughts.
Absolutely. And it's whatever their culture was that ingrained that in them. I mean, that's what they knew. Mm-hmm. So whether it be a healthy way of thinking or not, I mean, it was the time, I suppose.
Yeah. We have plenty of unhealthy ways of thinking now. So, it is what it is.
Yeah. And it's hard when you go through a trauma and you don't know any better, and all you know is the pain and all that suffering. And what do you do with it? You retaliate, or you get vengeful, or you get angry, or you shut down, or you have a psychotic break. I mean, just think about anything bad that's ever happened to you in your life. Did you respond every single time with, that's okay?
No,
I'm okay.
It's definitely fight or flight. Initially, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the healing takes time, and it takes time to get over those things. And if the thing was a death, well, there goes your time. Mm-hmm. There goes the opportunity for healing, and now you're just kind of stuck in this limbo. Yeah. So I read all these stories, and it made me so sad that these stories exist. But at the same time, these stories have really big lessons in them and have the opportunity to to perhaps teach us to be a little bit more fluid with our expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the importance, I think, of a lot of these stories is, regardless of what anyone chooses to put their belief or ideas or faith or spirituality into, their archetypal stories to some greater degree or the other. So, whether you look at them as purely allegorical or partly historic and partly true, or entirely true and entirely historic, as long as there's something that can apply to your foundation and your building blocks to make something of yourself and of those ideals, then that's all that really matters.
Absolutely. And even if it's simply just looking at it and going, I don't want to be like that.
Yes, that's very important.
And that's really good motivation to make sure that your spirit is in alignment and your psyche is healthily dealing with things, and you're facing your shadows and you're facing your demons, and you're working on through your subconscious and your fears and insecurities and all of these things. It's a lot of work. But if you have that motivation of, I don't want to turn into that, that's a big fire under your butt.
Well, and you're prepared as well for, as you start to understand those more shadow-like aspects, you're prepared as well for any sort of event that in ordinary life would just be absolutely devastating to you, right? You have a mooring and a foundation, and you have ballast in your ship, and the ship will ride itself as long as you are aware and you're conscious of what's happening, and you can use those ideals to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that brings us to Lamia, who is a Greek goddess of sorts. She was the daughter of Poseidon. She was a mistress of Zeus, and I think Zeus's character is probably fairly well known that he does not take no for an answer. He gets what he wants, when he wants, how he wants, despite his potentially psychotically jealous wife. So,
right.
So Lamia's story is one where she's a mistress of Zeus. She has children. Hera is so jealous that she destroys her children and deforms her appearance so that she now takes the hybrid form of a woman with the body of a serpent. Enter in more of a serpent image. In response to this, which, again, trauma, how do you heal without time? In response to this assault, Lamia decides that she's going to lure her victims to her domain and devour them. Well, okay, take the story at absolute face value. You had children with a god. His wife killed them all. Now you're a monster. You're literally physically a monster. You can't even turn to prostitution. Like, what?
Right. There's nothing left.
How do you? There is literally nothing left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, what are you going to do with that? And then in ancient Rome, the myth kind of changes a little bit, and she becomes a blood-sucking witch. Which, again, like, that ties into the whole massive trauma and how do you deal with something like that? I think if I was turned into a half snake, I would probably eat people too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of not just the trauma, but as you said earlier as well, just a lot of building those things up as well too, and a lot of in all of these characteristics, all these archetypes, a lot of power that's built up off of those things as well. Now, for anyone listening, and I'm just going to preface this with, because I'm sure there are some that are going to go, oh, this sounds like some pretty dark stuff, right? And they're going to think they have an understanding of where you're headed, and I'm not even presuming that I know where you're headed, but I kind of think I have an idea of I know where you're headed. And just bear in mind that power can be used for people listening, can be used for good or for bad or when needed. And that's the beauty of all of these things that we have here is that it's clay for us to mold. So,
Yep. So, okay. So that brings us to Lilith in the Garden of Eden story. Now, I know that there's some debate on whether or not this story was truly in the mythos, or if it was a satirical story written, or what. The biggest thing with Lilith is that she is an archetype. She is an archon. It is an example of how to deal with trauma in a lot of ways, and how to deal with your shadow, and how to deal with that subconscious. And everybody has these things within them. They have a darkness side of them. So what are you going to do with it? When I read the story of her with Adam and Eve, it seemed like in the beginning she was very much an innocent, and she didn't understand what was happening. And then all of a sudden she was cast out and she was abandoned. And first trauma, right? Abandonment. Mm-hmm. And she didn't understand why, and she didn't know what was going on. And then all of these things started happening. And perhaps because she was made of the clay and not Adam's rib, she was able to tap into that creative power. And so she created something of herself.
Mm-hmm. She would, this is just a little bit of my take on, and I'd have to go back and read the stories again, but if I remember correctly, at least in one version, so she was made of, they used the term mud, basically. So instead of even just being clay, it's mud, but it's still the primeval, lower earthly forces. And then, as you're saying as well, the archetype, right? And that goes back to the Plato, realm of forms, but on the lower side, which is still completely and utterly useful. But I honestly suspect, and I have no validation for this whatsoever, but I honestly suspect it would not surprise me to find out that her actual sort of origin, it wouldn't surprise me to find out that it was related to specifically forms of kind of proto-Gnostic Jewish mysticism, right? That she's almost there as sort of a version of Sophia on Earth, but a lower realm, sort of Sophia stepping into her shadow kind of thing. That would not surprise me in the least bit.
There's a story that it was the true essence of Eve, that God made the figures, and the true essence of Eve, which was, she was Sophia-esque, raw power, really raw creation power, and it was her that breathed life into Adam and Lilith. And so it was that spark that animated them. And Lilith, being a woman, I would assume, have a much closer tie to that energy, because she would be likened to that Eve figure. And then Eve created the human Eve as a physical representation to help further along. So hence with the apple and gaining knowledge, and now we've got the Gnostics, and we've got, we can think for ourselves, and we can do math, and we can build stuff, and we can do all these wonderful things as humans that we can do. So yeah, I think that there's definitely huge representation of the duality of the male-female. And if you don't have one, you just can't have the other. They just don't work without that balance. It's the cross of the energies. It's the rose in the center. You have to have both in balance.
Absolutely.
Or everything just goes to chaos and hell. I mean,
my wife and I have discussed this idea several times, and it's kind of Pythagorean in nature, but it's not a Pythagorean thing that I've seen. And it can be adapted to either giving physical birth or to the idea that you're talking about here, the idea of those sort of aeons, those syzygies, or in the lower realms, the archons, and the dualistic nature of them. But, you know, 1 and 1 is not 2, because man and woman equals 3. So everyone's gotten that wrong forever, but try getting through college on that.
Yeah, right? Yeah, so that's, you know, it's funny. I was doing all this research and looking at all these stories and going, oh my gosh, this is so sad, but necessary. And on Instagram, I started seeing all these memes because, you know, we're in the world of memes. And every single one was like, that's totally Lilith energy. That's totally Lilith energy. So I'm going to read a couple of these because they're so good. And this first one fits in with the whole story of Adam and in the garden. I disagree with the notion that women can't handle the truth. Women can handle the truth just fine. The problem is that you expect women to handle the truth in a way that still benefits you at her expense. And that just like,
yeah,
dude,
I think
if that wasn't written for Adam, I don't know.
And I think, unfortunately, across most societies, for better or worse, and that could be even things that help men generally. You know, you ask your wife an opinion of something, right? But you already know the answer, and you know the answer is going to be to the negative if she tells the truth. It's built into most societies, for better or worse. It's there, all the way down to that interpersonal stuff, for sure. So,
yeah.
Another thought that you triggered in me here that I find interesting, and maybe you will as well. Maybe this will add some to the conversation. Is you know, the Lilith, basically German siren sort of thing, right? But if you go back to the Book of Enoch and you look at, you know, when the fallen come to Earth to be with human females, by the time they are actually wiped out in the Book of Giants and all of that stuff, and you get the various different interpretations coming through, 2 things strike me as very interesting. The first thing is that, you know, the angels are punished. They're sent to Tartarus or Sheol or whatever, Hades, at the time. And then, of course, the giants are wiped out in the flood. They become the demons of the earth and inside the earth. Again, children of women here, right? And then the women, the thing that gets missed out on a lot, they become the sirens of the world, right? And so there's an interesting correlation there too. And of course, they are grieving for their children as well.
Yeah. And what do sirens do?
Exactly.
They sing.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when a woman loses her child? She wails, she sings, she screams, she cries, she rails against it using her voice.
Yeah. And that is not a correlation that I would have naturally come to without this conversation with you. So thank you for that little gear turn there. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy to help. There was one other one that I will read. There's a few of them, but I'll just pick this other one because it goes into shadow work. It says, "Do not slay your demons. Dissect them and find out what they've been feeding on." And I think that is a perfect segue into real shadow work and getting into your subconscious and figuring out, what are you afraid of? What are you harboring? What are you holding on to? What do you need to do to allow yourself to go into the next steps of healing? Because our bodies and our souls are naturally designed to go into healing.
Yeah.
We're stopped and we're blocked by our own thoughts and our own fears and our own insecurities and the crap food that we eat, and all these poisons in the air and the earth and our houses and all these things. So how do we get to a point where we can allow our body and our soul and our mind and our emotions to naturally progress to full healing as it's designed to do? Well, a lot of it starts with figuring out your emotions. I mean, starting with your diet is a great place to start, because there's definitely a correlation between diet and emotions. And there's a correlation between what goes on in the physical will go on in your spiritual. Those two things are so deeply linked.
And you're nailing all this stuff, by the way, because let me just say that I've had a very strange day, and I'm going to interject just a little bit here about a couple of things that came to me. I've been really working on my spirituality for the past couple of months, and it's something I've always been into, but I haven't sat down and done anything with it. Like, I do things a lot, folk magic things that I know that I've always done, that I've been raised with, and all that stuff. And there was a time when I used to be very, very into ceremony and all that stuff, and I've gotten back into it now. And it's because I'm going through a number of changes in my life that involve business and and things of that nature. And I have an 8-year-old daughter and a wife, and trying to make sure that I'm planning in case anything were to ever happen to me. Being in the distilled spirits industry for 10 years, I've laid way off drinking. I hesitate to say that I've quit, because I still will drink every once in a while because I'm in the industry, but I'm trying to take a little better care of myself, and that includes spiritually. So, and I won't say the revelation of what I found out today, but I found out some pretty disturbing things about someone that I grew up around, and it suddenly, I had some potential answers to some questions, and I'd been doing a lot of shadow work anyways, right? So on the way home, I'm listening to this podcast, and it's about Gnosticism, ironically. And they're talking to one of the leaders of the Gnostic Catholic Church, and they say, well, what do you do when somebody comes in? And, they've been, they feel like they've wasted their life on religion, and they've 40 years or 50 years worth of just feeling like they're living a lie, and this and that and the other. And the guy didn't have an answer. He didn't really have any answer, and it like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, this is actually not that hard to answer. And I realized I was answering for myself. What you do is you look at your life and you go, no matter how bad your life is, there are inherent truths that you know to be true, regardless of how bad your life has ever been. So you go through and you eliminate all the things that you know are untruths to you. And then you go back and you look at all those inherent truths and you go, which ones of these don't actually make sense? And whatever is left, that's your foundation. And that's the work. So I was actually going to record a podcast about that, but I may not have to do it now, because you're you're on that wavelength. So,
well, yeah, I mean, shadow work is one of those things that's so layered and so it's so hard to pinpoint, but it's also so simple. Because if you're looking at your life and you're going, oh, I'm miserable and everything sucks, and how do I change this? It starts with little things. Go outside for 5 minutes a day and put your bare feet in the grass and just breathe for 5 minutes and see how you feel after that. Don't sleep with your phone right next to your head. Put it on the other side of the room. And if you use it for your alarm, put it on the other side of the room, and it's more likely that you'll wake up when you have to go turn off your alarm because you have to get out of bed. So, there's that. Don't drink the tap water. We know that they put a lot of stuff in the tap water. There's pharmaceuticals. There's the chemicals that they use to clean it. There's pesticides. There's all kinds of stuff in tap water. Start with your diet. What are you eating? And then that extends to, what are you consuming?
Mm-hmm.
What are you consuming with your music, your TV, your podcasts, your thoughts, your friends, the things that you say about yourself. One of the phrases that I absolutely just like makes me cringe is the phrase "good morning." I hate that phrase. I shouldn't say that I hate it, but it gets me every time. Because why would you want to start your day with morning?
Yep. Yeah. Word magic. Exactly.
Word magic. Good dawn. Happy Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a bazillion other things that you can say. You can go into the grand rising, but even that one's just like, that's been so hijacked. Ew.
But that's not very Saturnalian of you. You know, that people won't understand that because, yeah.
I don't want to start my day sad.
I understand. I agree.
And
people
I
don't think about the words.
And I wouldn't want to be one of those people that curses another person either.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that people don't really think about. When you say something, you know, oh, you're sick? Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you feel better. You've just declared them sick.
Mm. That's a good one. I hadn't thought of that one. I had not thought of that, but that makes sense. I will say I did with all this stuff that I've been dealing with. I had a pretty big revelation about water, which I'm not going to get into yet because I've got people I'm going to bring on the show about that, but trying to be more conscientious of the way I am because I cuss a lot. And I do get angry because I just get angry in the business about things. But my wife yesterday brought me a cup of tea. And of course, I'm dumb because, you know, I'm a big, dumb male, and she hands it to me and it was hot. And I knew it was hot, but it burnt me. And of course, I'm like, you know, mother friggin' cussing at it and everything. And then then I told her, I'm like, I'm not mad at you. It's not your fault. I'm the one to grab the hot teacup. She goes back out of the room. And then I'm over here like apologizing to the tea. Like, please be good to me.
Yes, as you should, because you know,
yep.
You want to be really careful because water will take on whatever you give it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and that goes into frequency. That's a frequency thing.
Yep.
If you're surrounding yourself with frequencies that are icky, which is apparently my favorite word this week, then your life is going to be icky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all those things build up. They all build up, you know, and that's one of the very first things that I realized about trying to not drink as much, right? Was, and I'm completely fine around everybody. I'm not, I don't get angry or violent or anything like that. It's me. Like I'll walk in, you know, go to walk in the bathroom to get ready to take a shower or whatever and be, you know, half drunk and look at myself and be like, you're an idiot, you know, and you're putting that on yourself. And I distinctly remember the first time I realized like, hey, what you're doing is not healthy and it's also not helping. So,
yeah. Well, and with alcohol, it's, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love tequila. It's my jam. I love tequila. But you do have to be conscientious because they are called spirits.
Absolutely. Yes.
And you will take on stuff. So if you're not mindful and you're not prepared for that experience, then you're opening yourself up to a lot of things that could do you harm. And it could be as simple as you just can't stop.
Yep.
And what does alcoholism do to somebody's life? I mean, that wrecks relationships and your psyche and your body and everything else, because everything else goes by the wayside. So alcohol is one of those things that is beautiful for what it is, but it's a snake to handle carefully.
It is. And I would even say that that includes just the production of alcohol, because most of it, you know, it's all alcohol is a key and it is a gift. And there are things that can be done for the positive with it. And it descends obviously from alchemy, but the vast majority of industrial producers out there have no interest in that, and it's a commodity to them. And so none of those things enter into the equation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry, I have sidetracked your show with my self-help therapy over here. Man.
No, this is perfect. This is perfect. You're helping me keep my thoughts grounded. But that's part of why I love what you do with it. I mean, what you're doing with your distillery and everything that you're working with is it should be absolutely everywhere, because that acknowledgement and respect paid to it, you don't see that in mass produced.
Right.
You don't even really see it in the guys making moonshine in their bathtub. Like, it's
no. There's very few. Very, very few.
There's very, very few.
The mezcaleros, the small mezcaleros in Mexico, you'll run into it more from a Catholic perspective, or even Santeria. You'll see some of it with like real old school Appalachian moonshiners, but there's very few of those guys left and gals left. And you probably amongst the biodynamic crowd in France, you'll probably run into it a little bit, but that's really about it.
Yeah. And it should, I think that modern society, in a lot of ways running from their shadows, has simply gotten lazy with their practices. Mm-hmm. People are just lazy. They don't take the time to think about what they're doing. They don't take the time to look into what they're doing. They don't take the time to pay attention to symbols and signs. And there's symbols around us everywhere. There's constant messages to us everywhere. And there's just very little room for it in the modern hubbub of life. Now, social media has done a really interesting thing, because you see a lot of these pages where they put up inspirational quotes, or they're trying to, well, I suppose they're trying to just get more views, but their content is uplifting or inspirational, or it kind of makes you think. And those things have the power to get through into your psyche and make you go, wait a second, whoa, what did I just read? But if you're not open to that, if you're so closed off and running from your shadow that hard, it's going to take perhaps a bigger thing than one line on Instagram to get you to think about it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Saying that, all it takes is just a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of interest and a little bit of, well, wait a second, there's got to be something else. There's got to be more. Yeah.
So one more historic / theology question and concept architect. Actually, I guess kind of two here that come to mind before we go into a little bit more of how you choose to work with Lilith. It's always kind of struck me a little bit, and I know that there's also, there's obviously Venus connections and Anna Ishtar here with what I'm about to say, but I would also suspect that in some ways in the New Testament that the archetype of Mary Magdalene is not terribly dissimilar to Lilith, at least in the fact that later on they try to portray her as a whore, etc. But she's also the only one that she stays there with him the whole time, and had special meaning to him, which would again speak to the Sophia, the idea that they were both, matched syzygies or matched aeons, however you want to say that. And I'm curious your take on that. And then one more piece of that I just thought of as well with the fallen angels, the idea of the Nephilim, whether they were real giants or not, doesn't matter. But this idea of blood royale and this idea of bloodlines. So on the male side, you have quote unquote dragon blood. And then on the female side, you have the fairy blood, or the, Tuatha De Danann, right? And we all know the stories about the changelings and all of that stuff. So if they're looking for their children, then they're going to find children, or, don't take food from the fairies and that whole thing, or you end up in their realm. So it just, it clicks some gears in my head when it comes to all that stuff.
Oh, it's so funny that you say that. Okay. All right, Mary Magdalene. I think that this archetype of Lilith, this character, this idea of a woman who is demonized, you see that frequently. That's a reoccurring theme. And I wish I could say I have the answer as to why that's a reoccurring theme. My feeling on it is simply suppression of the truth, to separate humanity, to cause division, to keep us from knowing that we are more, to keep us in this state of subservient mindlessness. Because when you look at people who come into their power, they do their work, they take personal responsibility for themselves and their lives, and they go, nope, you can't tell me what to do. You're not going to pull the wool over my eyes. I know that you're trying to trick me. I'm not going to be manipulated. I'm not going to participate in your ways of ritual craziness. You see those people thrive in their lives. You don't see them depressed. You don't see them manic. You don't see them in a state of just misery. You see them thrive. Their home lives are good. Their work lives are good. They're happy. And not only are their lives enriched, but every life that they touch around them walks away shinier. So if we're looking at a potential of people coming into that power and doing all that work and dealing with their shadow and learning compassion, which is shadow work, you can't do shadow work and not learn compassion. We're looking at overall a better world. A world perhaps that has free energy and no food shortages, and there's abundance, and there's no war, and there's no crime, and there's no destruction, unless to build something new. So, I mean, there's my political and philosophical take on the suppression of humans. As for the dragon and fairy energy, oh man. I think that there has been a struggle between the two for a very long time. And I think that it has been a struggle of dominance versus peace, or dominance versus equality. Yeah, that's all. I'm being told I'm not allowed to say any more on that. The Tuatha De Danann story is very interesting because the original people of them, they walked the earth in Ireland about, 400 years after the deluge, so after the flood. They came and they conquered a civilization of peaceful farmers, and after a time they were up against an enemy that they couldn't quite defeat, so they receded into the land. You see them in the mists in Ireland. There's a small faction still that worships them here. And then, of course, there's very strong like kitchen witch folk magic ideology, even within the Catholic Church, of, you know, leaving offerings and don't piss off the fairies and stay away from that mushroom ring, and you know, there's all that stuff.
Yeah, you see quite a bit of that even in the cunning folk stuff. There's quite a bit of that still, even in that tradition.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of it is communing with the natural world around you. I think that humans really crave that, and I'm not in Dublin. I'm out in the country, and what you see in the country, even though there is a bit of a disconnect from the quote-unquote woo-woo, you still see farmers out in their fields. You still see people in the land. You still see people who would never, ever trade their lives to go live in a city, because they can't fathom being away from the peace, being away from the quiet, being away from that communion with the earth. And a fair few of them are very, very Catholic. But the Catholic faith and the mythos here of the saints and St. Patrick and all these different individuals has just sort of morphed into the paganism and the Catholic Church. And there's a really fascinating marriage between the two, which I have a few Catholic friends, not many, I'll admit, but some of the superstitions and beliefs that they have are just so amusing. I have one friend, her mom is very, very Catholic, and she always gets mad at me because I can't help but laugh, and I tell her, your superstitions are so cute. Like, but it is an interesting thing to see. And then of course you have the whole Catholic Protestant fight, and the Protestants don't seem to be as in tune with that old way and that old folk magic. They seem a lot more in the way of modern things, and, you know, don't touch me with that holy water and that sort of thing. But I mean, I can tell you a dozen places an hour from my house where you can get holy water. So yeah, it's I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah. You touched on all of it for sure. Absolutely. So yeah, I think let's kind of delve into how you look at working with Lilith and in that shadow work and those things that you're speaking about, how Lilith is, because again, I think there are still going to be people, even if they've listened this far into the show, because they don't know, they're still going to be just imagining only the negatives, right? Because it's so pounded into their heads. So let's talk about how that can be used in a positive way. So,
for the record, I do not deity worship. I do not deity fear, and I do not deity worship. They are either friend or not friend. And that is how I treat them. Just like I treat any human.
That's a good way to do it.
Friend, not friend. That's it. Simple. When I started writing stuff down, I was like, I don't know if I've ever really worked with Lilith. And then I started really looking into her, and I started seeing all those memes that were like, wow, that's really Lilith energy. And I started realizing, okay, so you can't actually go into the subconscious and that shadow realm without being touched by this archetype. Because the whole thing is about freedom and justice and being out from under the thumb of persecution and gaining a little bit of compassion and understanding and learning where you've gone wrong trying to make amends for that wrong, figuring out it's figuring out your darker side, you know. And sometimes I see this with my small children a lot. They're 3 and almost 5. You know, my son will hit my daughter, and then she'll cry, and then I'll come in and go, what's going on? And she blames it on him, and then but he has a story of, well, no, this is what happened. So I could easily go in there and be like, you hit her, you're in trouble. Or I could stop and go, okay, there's 2 sides to this. You hit her, and that's not okay. What's going on? What triggered that reaction from you? Oh, she took your toy. Oh, she's not letting you watch TV. Oh, whatever it is. So I think that this archetype really dives into the understanding of the story, the understanding of what happened, the understanding of the minute details and
the compassion
and the subtle, the compassion. And sometimes we have to know the story, and we have to know the background, and we have to know the other side.
That's a really good way
fully understand what happened
to think about the archetype like that, for sure. And I think probably a little different than even most people who are outside of mainstream religion, even or spirituality, even think about it. I think that's an interesting way to identify that. It's almost Jungian in a lot of ways, in the way that you're thinking of it.
Yeah.
And I think, and this is probably a little bit more along the maybe more ritualized magic sort of path of things, but I think even taking that archetype and realizing that all that built up, pent up frustration, right? Vengeance without the hate is just justice. And so let's take, for example, let's say a positive working that someone could do using that archetype would be, say if you're a distiller and you're working for a company that's bad, they disrespect you, you put a lot into your work, you've given them recipes, you've given them stories, ideas, etc., right? So you can be vengeful. Mm-hmm. And not have any of that compassion whatsoever and go back after them like that. But that's going to be a lose-lose situation for everybody. There's no way around it. Or you can try to pursue justice, not through the legal system, but through proving a point, right? Through, well, I will go elsewhere and start elsewhere, and then maybe I'll be in a better position. And then maybe I will help you by making sure you know all the things you need to know, but I will do everything I can to get to a point to where my distillery is performing better than your distillery, right? That would be an example of how to take that power and use it in such a way that benefits you, but also doesn't directly hurt them in any way. It just makes them also have to stop and go, oh, you know, maybe if I treated that person better, that wouldn't have happened that way.
Absolutely. That's a great example. I think that it's really easy for people to go, oh, well, you hurt me. Screw you. And that feeling needs to be seen and addressed in the person that is feeling it. Because if you're putting that out, part of that is a projection. So what have you done that you're ashamed of, that you're hiding with your vengeance and with your anger and with your revenge? What part did you play in that? That maybe if you had done a few things differently, or if you had handled it with a little bit more compassion or a little bit more patience, how would that have changed and saved you from lashing out?
Yeah.
And shadow work is hard.
It is.
It's hard. It can be really hard to be a nice person when people are, excuse me, assholes.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you respond to something with vengeance or with revenge or that level of negativity, you're only hurting yourself, because you're keeping yourself in that position of, well, I was right, they were wrong, and now you're blind to your shadow.
I also think that
now you're blind to your subconscious.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy too, right? So if you use the vengeance and you don't take away the part that you don't need, not only is there that what have you done, even if the person is completely innocent, the other side of that is that if you're throwing that in someone's face, and I've been very guilty of this in my life for sure, and I know that I have, and I have no problem admitting that, but then
Haven't we all?
then you're putting up a wall, right? You're putting up a fortification, quote unquote. But then you're mad if they hit the fortification that you threw in their face, which is not really a fortification at all because they still affected you. So it did you no good.
Yep.
Whereas you should have remained a little bit vulnerable. And at the very least, that karmic loop either comes back on them in the form of they recognize that. Sometimes that happens, rarely, or at least other people will see it and recognize it, and then it comes back around.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how much I'm going to owe you at the end of this for therapy, but thank you.
You're welcome. You don't owe me anything. I'm just happy to be able to have the conversation. I mean, I went through a period in my 20s where I was deep diving into spirituality and taking personal responsibility, going into what's in our food, what's in our water, what's in our sky, what's in our ground, you know, crystal healing, all this stuff. And then I hit about 30 and I had my second son, and I just went into super hibernation. He turned 1 year old, COVID hit, and I went underground. I mean, I disappeared. I wiped my Instagram. I went into full hibernation mode, and that was after almost 10 years of sharing crystal healing knowledge with whoever would listen to me talk on Instagram.
Yeah.
And in this last 2 weeks, I've had this serious earthquake of it's time to come out of the cave now.
About the time that the sun moved back into Aquarius. Yeah,
it was just about that time, and Pluto and all of that happened.
Just like the weirdness today
all
with
the
my
planets went direct.
Yeah, and Neptune and the moon and Neptune today. That there's weirdness there for sure. So. Oh yeah.
There's been a lot happening energetically.
I think that you and I are kind of on the same page with how all those things work. So I don't know your age, and I won't ask you publicly, but I'm about to turn 40.
I'm 35. I don't mind.
Yeah, I'm about to turn 40, and very similar. So in my 20s, I grew up around people that, you know, all my people are from Eastern Kentucky, but they moved to Indiana, and I was born in Indiana, and so grew up on the farm and grew up around them. And my grandma, although she was Baptist, she did a lot of things that she didn't realize were folk magic. It came from somewhere. She just didn't know where it came from. And so I've always been deeply interested in spirituality, but much like you in my 20s, I got very deep into it because I had turned our old tobacco farm here into we called it ecologically grown produce. So not certified organic, because, you know, some of the things that are there are questionable. You know, rattlesnake venom is organic as well, but it'll still kill you. And so I got really deep into that stuff. And literally when I turned 30, I got into the legal distilling industry. And although I was still in it and I still had things that I practiced with my alchemy and in my everyday operations, I wasn't paying attention to it the way I should. And I would say probably about October and November of this past year, and then very specifically right around the time that the Aquarius thing happened, it started to hit pretty hard. So
it's been I did a workshop on Friday the 13th. It was in October. We did ritual oils, and the message that came through was full on. I mean, I've never had a message like this. It shook me to my core. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. And I have been in a 5-year period of taking care of babies. I had my son and then my daughter, and it was babies. No oxygen mask for mommy. Babies get everything. And making that oil was like, okay, it's your turn. And then all the stuff happened with the stars in the last couple months, and it's just been like crazy accelerated growth and wake up and visions and just insanity. Every time I turn around, I'm like, oh my God, there's another sign. There's another synchronicity. There's another thing.
My wife and I are going through all the same things for sure. And something I mentioned to you here, and I'll leave it in the show, but and we can talk about it at some point too in the future. But at some point, because this conversation has been so interesting, I would like to actually get you and JJ Rose and my wife on a panel. And I won't even be involved, but I'll let you guys do just an episode of If You Have Ghosts, because I want to hear the three of you have a similar conversation to this, because I think there would be some really interesting enlightenment to come out of that. So
absolutely, I'm down.
Awesome.
I love JJ. I've known JJ for it's been like a week, and I feel like she's one of my oldest friends.
Yep.
She's just that kind of a person.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, she is a lot of fun to have conversations with and bounce ideas off of, and another person just like yourself, where even if not everything lines up, and even if the ideals are not exactly the same, it doesn't matter, because there's a conversation there to be had, which is something that everybody could do with more of, right?
Yeah.
And even if you have a disagreeable conversation with someone, and this is something that I've only started to understand in the past couple years, because I used to just get really mad about it. But, even if you walk away and you have that sort of that gut feeling of, ugh, there's still something there to be taken from whatever that interaction was, and that can be used. And
maybe to tie it into shadow work, maybe that lesson is how you're reacting. Maybe it's a lesson for you to have a little bit more compassion for somebody who's on a different walk of life, who perhaps is stuck in a box or is stuck on a path that's just looping and not exploring, and maybe they just don't have quite enough curiosity about what's off the path. I don't think that exploring the forest is a bad thing.
Yes.
I think staying grounded is really, really important. But if you never explore the forest, you're going to miss all the beauty of the trees and the bugs and the frogs and the birds and the foxes, and you're going to lose so much of what's around you, because none of those things go onto the path because they smell like human. So go explore the woods.
Yeah, and I even think that a lot of the wisdom traditions they tell us things like that. I mean, in the Hermetic thing I just recently did, the one line that stuck out in there, because I have been doing that a lot more often lately, where I'm questioning, this person has this thing that maybe I don't like or don't understand or don't respect, and they're not looking any deeper than whatever the face value is, which I do have a tendency to find annoying. But then I think, no, that's partially because of you and because of your perception of what and who they are, and there's nothing wrong with what and who they are. As I said in that thing, some people are not made to transcend those seven spheres in that way, and it then goes on to say nothing about not having conversations with them, or not understanding them, or not having that compassion. So it's just a matter of stepping outside of yourself to some degree to do it. So
yeah. And if you can't observe something without getting emotionally invested in it, you have a lot more shadow work to do.
Yep.
Because sometimes it's not about us, sometimes it's about them, and maybe you just need to be that, hey, there's something else out here. Okay, but you're not ready, but it's going to go in their subconscious. Yeah. And it's going to take root, and it's going to wait until they're ready.
Planting seeds. Just planting seeds.
Yep. Just planting seeds. And you don't plant the seeds in the sun, you plant the seeds in the ground, which is dark.
In the womb. absolutely.
In the womb.
Yeah. I watched I'll throw this in real quick before we wrap up. I was watching, it popped up in my Facebook feed or something this morning when I got up. And it was Mick Dodge, who used to be on TV, the barefoot guru dude, right? And he was talking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and brilliant guy, by the way, when he speaks, wonderful to watch. But he said he was talking about, the left and the right and tree people and animal people, and he goes, and I know some of the people that I know are going to say that sounds like woo woo shit, and he goes, but think about that word. He goes, finish the word. What is that word? Woo, womb. And I'm like, well, shit. There's my spiritual key for the day right there. Yeah, right. Yeah, he's worth following for sure and watching. He's got some really interesting things with word magic.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, pretty.
Well, I know what my new word's going to be.
That's great. Well, tell me a little bit before we wrap up here about the podcast that you have that you're working on.
Yeah. It's me and my best friend, Anna. We've known each other since we were 5. So there's a lot of history. There's 30 years of history. And it's really just us chatting and talking about our life experiences. A lot of them are in spiritual realm, from early childhood. There's our hell stories, the horrors that we've been through and how we've gotten through them, and my transformation as a mother from being scared to death of birth to free birthing my daughter. And then all of her work. She's an energy healer, and she, her credentials are like JJ's. It's a mile long. She does all sorts of stuff, but her biggest thing is working with magnets and healing the body and getting the body into a place of solid healing and purity, for lack of a better word, so that the spiritual can be integrated into that, and how the physical and the spiritual overlap. So it's a podcast about us, really, but it's things that anybody could identify with or take a little bit for, maybe it calls out to somebody and helps them with something, or
fantastic. Well, where do people find the podcast at? Where can we listen at?
It's currently on Spotify. I am having issues with the RSS feed. I am not a technologically inclined person, and Anna drains phone batteries. Yeah, so the first episode dropped today, Monday, February 12th, and the next episode will drop next Monday. Although it drops at 1 a.m. my time, so it actually drops Sunday evening for the US.
Very cool.
Or afternoon for the US, depending on where you are. So there will be changes over the next couple weeks as I learn how to navigate the world of technology.
Yeah. When you figure that one out, let me know too, because it's a whole. My new favorite. Thing.
I'm almost.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm almost tempted to do like a proper how you do this stuff video, because every video that I've watched on YouTube is like, that was not helpful.
And just confuses you that much more. Yes.
And there's so many options and nobody knows what they're doing, and they don't actually tell you what buttons to push to do the thing that you're trying to do. Oh, it's so annoying.
My new favorite thing, and this has really affected the show and the listenership of the show to some degree, is, I'm trying to build an audience here. My new favorite thing is that if you share a Spotify link on your Facebook, no one can share off of that post, which is the dumbest thing I have ever seen. And it's frustrating. Like, we're at the point now where I will wait until it ends up on Amazon and I'll share from Amazon because they can share off of that.
Oh, that's so annoying.
Yeah.
I really despise the Book of Stolen Faces. I cannot stand that website.
Right. If it wasn't for the
And I label it that very specifically because it is the Book of Stolen Faces. There's more pages out there. There's more profiles out there that are fake profiles that they've stolen from a genuine human. Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Oh.
If it weren't for the fact that that seems to be the preferred platform for the distilled spirits industry and for home distillers, I probably wouldn't have anything to do with it. But that seems to be, for whatever reason, the crowd that is there for what I do, whether it be distilled spirits or even this thing, any of the interrelated things, the ones that are really into it, that seems to be the congregation point, is that particular platform, versus anywhere else. And then I'm also that guy that's like, people are like, oh, you should get on our Discord. And I'm like, I don't have time for the things that I already do. And I don't want to get on your Discord. Not that I'm not interested.
Discords can be really chaotic.
Yeah.
The Discords are a lot of fun, but they can be really chaotic when you wake up and you have 85 messages and you're going, wait a second. I only slept for 7 hours. What the hell, you guys?
My Facebook is already like that. I solid hard pass on anything else. I have a TikTok and I don't use it. I may start using it here and there for some if you have ghost stuff, but the last time I looked at it, and I'm like, I guess I'm now at the age, getting ready to turn 40, where I'm like, I don't understand any of how this works. This makes nothing is user friendly in any way, shape, or form about this platform. And then I see these guys all the time. I'm going to do a short rant here, and I'll work this in the shadow work later this week. I see these guys and they're like, oh man, I've got 400,000 followers on TikTok. And I'm like, yeah, you have 400,000 followers that'll watch your 30-second video. But of those 400,000 followers, how many will watch something more than 30 seconds? How many will buy anything from you? And if they buy anything at all from you, if you're trying to make a career, will they buy a second thing from you? Because my 3,000 followers that I have will buy everything that I ever put out because they're dedicated to the craft and the art and the passion. So which would I rather have? 400,000 people that are like, oh, look at this entertaining monkey for 30 seconds versus, oh, Alan's doing a weird, cool thing over here and let's go support that.
I think that we get really caught up with having all these numbers and having all these views and having all of this notoriety and getting in front of as many people as we possibly can. But the value and sincerity of those people who will support you because they love you and what you're doing.
Yep.
And they're genuine human beings that are on the same or similar wavelength that you are on. Those people are invaluable. They
absolutely are. And that is something that I can say over the 10 years that I've been in this industry, especially, let's say, the past 5 or 6. There are people that, not even in the industry, but just people that were fans of spirits or fans of home distilling or whatever, that have become lifelong friends, that legitimately care. And they may not be people I see very often because they're spread out all over the place. But if something's happening in my life and they catch wind of it, they'll call, they'll text, they'll send emails, they check in from time to time. Some of these people, honestly, the ones that I've gotten close to, probably more so than most of my friends that I've had in real life. Yeah, I'm closer to these people, a lot of them at this point, than I have been people my entire life. So, and it's because, it's a larger population pool to pull from, and you're going to find some people that are on the same wavelength for sure. And it's pretty special. So, they send cool little gifts. A friend of mine, I'll tell you about, I thought I had it in here, maybe not. Friend of mine, from Pennsylvania, who's a whiskey historian. She studies rye whiskey, and she's probably the foremost Pennsylvania rye whiskey expert in the world.
Oh,
She's
cool.
not a distiller, but she had sent me this article last year, and it was you'll love this because there's symbology and there's magic here too, German folk magic basically. She sent me this article from the 1800s, and it was all about how that the distiller should, I take that back, it was post-prohibition is when it was, because the distilleries had just opened back up, but how the distillers should take the bullhorn out of the still house. Well, the bullhorn is like the tip of a bullhorn that they made into a funnel, right? And they should take it out of the still house because the bullhorn makes angry liquor when you funnel through the bullhorn. That was the entire purpose of the symbological meaning of the article, the whole thing. And I was like, oh, that's really, really neat. And she of course says,
so cool.
yeah, she isn't really into the magic thing, but we were talking, and she goes, well, what was this thing about the bullhorn? And so I was explaining the symbology of it. And right around Christmas, she called and she goes, you'll have a package in a few days. And I was like, oh, okay. I figured she sent a sample whiskey or whatever. And so I got, she had a bullhorn funnel made for me, and then printed off a miniature version of that article and sent it so that I'd have one of them. So that's pretty special.
So cool.
You know, that's stuff you're not going to forget. So
can I speak on the symbology of that really quick?
Yeah.
So a bullhorn creating angry liquor. What does a bull use his horn for?
To defend or to gore or to hold territory. Aggression, yeah.
Aggression, right.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but horns are made up of similar material as nails and hair, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Your hair holds memory.
Mm-hmm. That's a valid point.
It's also an extension of your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So it acts as an antenna of sorts. So it would make electrical sense that it would create angry whiskey.
Yeah, I did not even think of the memory thing, but that makes absolute sense. And I hope Laura stumbles onto this, because trust me, I'm going to text her or call her in the next day or two and be like, hey, you know, my weird ghost show that you're not into, I learned a thing. So.
I love symbology. Symbology is one of my absolute favorite topics, and because you can dive into it, and there's so much there. Mm-hmm. And it can teach you so much, and there's aspects that you wouldn't think about normally unless you looked up what that red butterfly means, or what that, you know, bullhorn means, or whatever it is. So yeah, I absolutely love symbology.
Yeah, same
here. And it's so much fun tying it into something tangible that you can touch or explain also with science, or I love it.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on here. And at some point, I'm going to get you, JJ, and my wife on a panel, and we'll do a recording of that, because I think that you guys would have a lot to talk about. And especially because I think that your all's systems of ideas are just different enough, but also can feed into one another, that it would be an interesting conversation between three women. So yeah, let's make plans for that at some point. And
definitely.
Unless you got anything to add, I think we'll wrap up.
No, I think I said all I'm supposed to.
All right. Well, I'll end the recording here, and I'll catch up with you as soon as I stop it. The world is a confusing place, filled with all manner of shimmering distractions that take our conscious mind and our immortal souls and subvert them into the most basal of human emotions. Can any one of us, who considers ourselves a spiritual being, truly look around the carnival at the barkers, performers, and the caged animals and believe, even momentarily, that any of this is as it should be? My name is Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana, distiller, historian, occasional tinker, reenactor, and your host of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Have you ever noticed the world isn't quite what it presents itself to be? That something is just a little off kilter, just a little out of focus. Perhaps that movement you caught out of the corner of your eye was more than a shadow. That weight on your shoulder, more than fatigue. I have lived my whole life like this, aware, awake, and waiting for the next experience, positive or negative. Always apprehensive, always analyzing. I believe that spiritual warfare is real. I believe from societal observation that others are becoming acutely aware. I believe that many are being influenced by forces unknown in a negative and spiritually deprived way. I see soft disclosure in every corner of pop culture. Join us as we pull back the curtain, as the veil thins, and reach with us into the ether to reclaim the truth on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Hey, I just wanted to take a minute to give a shout out to JJ Rose and some of her friends who have been coming to me to come onto this podcast. It's, as I've said in the past, been a little difficult from time to time to get guests on this podcast. It's a thing of passion for me, not something that I do for money. A thing that I do because I love doing it, and I'm a spiritual learner. I am growing in my spirituality, and I've gone through leaps and bounds in the past 2 months alone. A lot of interesting, strange things have happened on my end, and none of which are negative. They're all positive, even though growth always hurts a little bit. But I think you're going to enjoy tonight's guest, and I think you're going to enjoy some of the guests that we have coming up, because they are helping to take this show to entirely new levels, and that is highly, highly thanks to JJ Rose. That being said, some of you know that I used to be very agriculturally centered, and I still am agriculturally centered. In fact, I would say the vast majority of my spirituality grew out of my life on the farm and the experiences that we had on the farm as documented in The Trickster, but also various experiences that I had growing up in this strange little town of Pekin, Indiana. We've certainly done our fair share of stories about the high strangeness around this place. Well, during that time of agricultural endeavor, when my real emphasis and passion was on not only the agriculture itself, but the spiritual elements of agriculture and the philosophy of agriculture, and this idea of being a productive citizen, that the greatest thing that you could ever do was to introduce some new useful variety for agriculture, for food, for people, for things for people to grow. I really got into plant breeding, open pollinated land-raised plant breeding, and ran seed companies, ran various forums, and those sort of things. In that line of work, there were a number of guys who very much so had made a career out of this. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Alan Mushroom Capular. And Alan Capular was the founder of what you now know as Seeds of Change. Later on, he went on with Peace Seedlings and did a lot of public domain plant breeding. He was also an amazing painter, an old school hippie who lived in multiple communes, and a beautiful person to talk to. I wouldn't go as far as to say that we became close friends, but we certainly became somewhat associates, and we talked back and forth on the phone quite a bit, and Alan sent me a lot of seeds over the years as well as some little pieces of his artwork that I really appreciated. He was someone that I really looked up to, not only because he was an absolute certifiable genius, and if you've never heard of him, look him up. He really was a genius. MacArthur Grant and all that fun stuff included. Also, though, Alan was quite the philosopher. His writings often tended, to bounce in between the scientific and the artistic. He was a huge admirer of early Bob Dylan, for example, and just wrote some really beautiful, profound things. I only recently found out that he passed away back in November, and I think the family kept it quiet, and I think they did for pretty good reason. He was a pretty big personality in those circles, and if you think that distillers or paranormal high strangeness folks are eclectic, well, wait until you meet some home plant breeders. It's a whole nother level of weirdness there. Alan had also had an interesting life in that there were multiple times when he had been diagnosed with cancer, and he sought alternative homeopathic treatments. He treated a lot of his illness himself, and then got into specialized treatments of his illness. At one point, they had literally given him a window, like they do many people, that you have X amount of time to live here on this earth, and he really hit the ground running and put the work in to save himself. Physician, heal thyself. That is a very hermetic thing, very tied to alchemy, and something that I always was just amazed by, right? That he wasn't going to let this thing get him down, but that he was going to face it head on. And thankfully, he did live to be 81 years old, which is pretty impressive considering the first time he was diagnosed with this terminal cancer, I believe, was in the early 1990s. Very few people get to that point where they can sort of overcome that demon. And I think that speaks as much to his spirit and his philosophy as it does his actual knowledge. Anyways, I went to peaceseedslive.com, and on the homepage there was a beautiful writing by Mushroom, and I thought I would share that here in honor of my friend before we get into tonight's episode. So it's called The End of Names by Mushroom. Sunlight in the morning bounces off of my brain. In a land where rain is becoming rare, and the melting of polar ice caps brings a feedback loop of awareness into the center of our minds. DNA sequences of nitrogen, heterocyclic bases make up chromosomes in patterns, unique for each of us, unique for our species, and for all species. One day soon, the sequence for one of us will be known exactly, just as the sequence of amino acids was worked out for proteins, insulin, ribonuclease, hemoglobin, so that now sequences fold in reaction space to give domains with molecular handles to the inside and outsides of our cells. The 20 amino acids specified by the genetic code and used to build proteins are unenhanced in the juices of common fruits and vegetables. We ignore origins and the core of sustainability. The large trees, one of our primary respirators, cycle oxygen, ventilating the interface of soil, water, air in which we live. Between air and earth, with water running in our veins, we have courted fire. Now the concentration of nuclear wastes, primarily for boiling water, contaminates parts of this country, world, and universe. The hoax of ownership continues to pervade our times, as the DNA barcode for each of us replaces our social security number. Where does our identity go when our salad is made up of leaves containing genes for 14 kinds of bacteria, representing 7 major biochemical adaptations, plus polysaccharide genes from algae, fermentation genes from yeasts, saprophytic adaptation genes from capped mushrooms, in addition to spore-making genes from ferns, vitamin E genes from cyanobacteria, floating genes from water hyacinths, salinity tolerance genes from glassworts, with more of the genetic sugars needed to repair and rejuvenate our chronically toxicated bodies. The combination of forms is the pathway of the opening of the treasure of the gene pool. With agreement from the courts, encouragement from the policymakers, strength of violent coercion from the military, our leaders of government and industry have decided to continue slavery by owning and selling the parts of our bodies. This includes intellectual property from the domain in our minds. Inside all of this is undivided and indivisible unity. I'd rather be connected to the common divine core of everyone and everything than dividing up the holy realm of life itself for gain, profit, and control, for domination, egotism, and vanity. We continue to allow the ownership of living things. This is championed by the pharmaceutical houses, purveyors of immense amounts of synthetic drugs, and speculators in biotechnology, intent on the marketing of atomic real estate, arguing for patents on all kinds of molecules, based on the uniqueness of inventions, and the advocates and contributors participate in the ongoing destruction of biosphere habitat